Paris.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Thanks, Ollie. Welcome to Monday's programme. How are you? Hope you've had a good day. Nobody likes Mondays. I said a little earlier on in a YouTube live stream. Never met anybody who does anyway. Good to be with you. Hope you've had a good weekend. It is September 10th, 2018. My name is Richie Allen, of course.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Richie Allen.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Well, I've got a good programme lined up for Monday. The author and geopolitical commentator, the broadcaster, Dean Henderson, joins me this hour. And we've got a couple of very interesting things to talk about. Dean Henderson, don't miss him, coming up this hour. And in the second hour, the Olympic athlete Allyn Condon returns to the programme. He's a very, very nice guy, is Allyn. And his family have been dealing with a terrible tragedy for the last few years. He was on the programme talking to us in January about the death of his baby boy Ben, who was only 8 weeks old when he died in 2015. There was a cover-up at the hospital where young Ben died, and the NHS Trust attempted to cover up the circumstances that led to young Ben's death. I want to follow that up because Allyn is campaigning to throw light on cases like Ben's, and there is a big protest coming up real soon, I think in about 10 days time, and I want to talk to Allyn about that. He is a very rare breed of athlete representing Great Britain in the Summer and Winter Olympics. Like I said, a very nice fella, and this is a very serious issue. Allyn Condon joins me in the second hour. So that's Monday's Richie Allen Show then. You can participate as usual. You've only got to tweet to me. My Twitter handle is @Richie Allen Show. I know I say it every bloomin' time, but I've got to say it every bloomin' time. @Richie Allen Show on Twitter, the way to send me a message during the live show. Not so much off air. I don't spend very much, if any, time on social media. But during the live show, send me a tweet and I'll get it, and I'll be glad to get it from you. All right. Yeah, mad old day today. September the 11th is tomorrow. Had a couple of emails. Well, Rich, are you going to do something tomorrow about September the 11th? And you know what? For the first time since I began making independent radio, for the first time since I left commercial mainstream radio, I'm not going to do anything tomorrow to mark the anniversary of it. And I'll tell you why. Tomorrow will be the 17th anniversary of it. Now, I did hint, didn't I? I made a YouTube live stream last week and I talked about possibly doing something on Tuesday, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I can't find a new way to cover the events of September the 11th, 2001. I've interviewed everybody. I mean everybody who's ever had an opinion on it. I had some tweets from people last week. You must get Dr. Judy Wood on the programme, Richie. Now, I interviewed Judy Wood 2 different times on 2 different occasions on 2 different radio stations. And Judy Wood has got some very interesting theories about how the buildings might have come down, directed energy weapons and other theories. And I don't have anything against those theories. But Dr. Judy Wood is not the most adult of human beings in terms of when you put the devil's advocate position to her, she gets a little bit diva-esque. Doesn't like being challenged, even though I would be very sympathetic to listening to alternative points of view about September the 11th. So I've interviewed all of these people before. Wonderful people like the architects and engineers, Richard Gage, Jim Mars, rest in peace. What more can you add to September the 11th? There's never been a more obvious false flag event. There's never been a more ludicrous story doctored up to explain how 3 skyscrapers collapsed into dust, disappeared off the face of the earth, collapsed into their foundations, footprint as our American friends say. The story is laughable on so many levels. I don't see any point in going over old ground again and again and again. Now, if you can tell me, Richie, here's a new way to get into September the 11th. I'm happy to hear it. I'll tell you something else. In my days in Spain, when my partner, my wonderful partner and I were in Spain, we spent many years in Spain, and I was doing radio over there, I was amazed at how many middle class, if you want to use that term, Brits on the Costa del Sol, sworn Tory voters, now sworn for life Conservative Party voters. I was stunned at how many of them, when you have a conversation with them and you're not very dogmatic, some of them would hear my Spanish radio shows where I would debunk, using guests, debunk the story of 9/11. And I was stunned at how many of them were indeed very sceptical about the official story. But to what end? You know, it doesn't seem to matter. That probably more people than you think understand that 19 hijackers run by a man in a cave in the Tora Bora Mountains did not plan and carry out September the 11th. So where do you leave that? What more do you do about it? I can't think of another way into it, so I'm not going to cover it tomorrow. I might have no audience, I might have no listeners tomorrow now, but I'm not going to get into it. If you've got something to say on it, I'll read it out. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. Doesn't mean I won't ever cover it again, but I need something new to get my teeth into. I just can't bear rehashing the same old stuff over and over again, you know? You know, we know all about the dancing Israelis. We know all about the insider trading and the betting that American Airlines and United Airlines shares would take a massive dive on that particular week, the put options. We know all about it. We know that buildings can't collapse into their own footprint. We know that buildings don't turn to dust because they're hit by aeroplanes. We know this. We know that passports don't appear magically in the rubble on the ground in Manhattan, in lower Manhattan. Muhammad Atta's passport, beautiful, pristine. We know this doesn't happen. But how long, as an old U2 song used to go, how long to sing this song? Anyway, there you are. Well, I'm going to be talking with Dean Henderson shortly about this, not specifically about the Swedish election, not about that, but as you probably know, the general election in Sweden has left the main political parties tied, almost tied, with about 40% of the vote each. Now, those parties would be the centre-left and the centre-right, age-old establishment parties, right? But the Nationalist Party, the Sweden Democrats, they got about 18%, which is a big gain for them. I think it's a gain of about 12 to 13%, if I heard right today. Correct me if I'm wrong. 13% maybe gain, maybe 14%. That's a big deal for them, I suppose, and their supporters. Now, both of the main parties have said, we will not get into bed with the Nationalist Party. We wouldn't stoop, we wouldn't deign, love that word, used it yesterday, we wouldn't deign to join forces with them. However, the Sweden Democrats party leader, a guy called Jimmy Åkesson, he said that he'll talk to all the other parties if they want to talk about forming a coalition with his Nationalist Party. So what's interesting about this today is right across television and radio and right across print media, editors and political commentators are saying that we're kind of seeing a surge in nationalism across Europe. That's what they're saying anyway. And I want to talk to Dean Henderson about this in a few minutes. Are we seeing a surge in nationalism across Europe? Maybe we are. You could look at Italy, the Five Star Movement and the League, nationalist parties, anti-Europe parties, kind of anti-immigration parties. They formed a coalition in Italy. In Germany, in Alemannia, you have the Alternative for Germany party, and they're gaining ground in terms of gaining members, and their vote share is on the rise. So you have the Freedom Party in Austria, another anti-immigration, anti-EU party. The Hungarian Prime Minister, dear listener, a guy called Viktor Orban. You know this already. Anti-immigration platform. This guy calls himself the defender of Hungary. And in Slovenia and Poland, it's fair to say that the right or the far right is kind of on the rise as well. It's on the rise. So what you have then is conservative commentators or people whose politics are on the far right. They are triumphantly, I suppose, saying that this must be proof that there is a rebellion of sorts going on amongst the people. That the rise of these nationalist parties must be evidence that people are, well, standing up to the establishment, right? And standing up to the deep state. But is that what's really going on? I would ask. And I want to kind of dig into this with Dean Henderson in a few minutes' time. Is that what's really going on? If you pay a bit closer attention to the parties themselves and maybe the people behind them, right? The money men, and we better say money women, lest we be accused of sexism. Maybe the people behind these parties are the establishment or just another version of the establishment anyway. Now, I know you know, I know that you know that I know that you know that where I'm going with this. You know where I'm going with this because I talk about this all the time. Right? Right. And I'm going to talk about this with Dean Henderson in a minute. By the way, Neil Sanders is doing absolutely stellar work on this and was on the programme. Neil Sanders, Mind Control, of course. Find him online. Marvellous guy and a marvellous guest on this programme. And he's looking deeper and deeper and deeper into the far right and the far left. And if these movements are genuine, now I have no doubt that on the ground, ordinary men and women like you and like me, they're genuine. The supporters of these movements in Italy and in Austria and in Hungary are genuine. They're fed up. They're fed up of stagnating wages, wages being driven down, no jobs, massive pressure on vital public services. They're genuinely pissed off of all of that and they want something different. But what they are getting in terms of these parties, how real are they? And that's what I want to get into with Dean and more in a few minutes' time when Dean Henderson comes on the programme. And if you've got something you want to contribute to that, please tweet it to me and I will read it out when I'm talking with Dean there. This Guy Verhofstadt, this guy, the former Belgian Prime Minister, obviously he's the European Union man over Michel Barnier. He's kind of coordinating the European Union in its dealings with Brexit, right? In its dealings with Brexit, Dominic Raab. So Guy Verhofstadt, this guy is great. This guy's great gas, as we'd say in Ireland. He's great gas. He says that Brexit has saved the European Union from the wave of Eurosceptic politicians that wanted to destroy it. This arsehole, now I've been saying this for 2 years, is basically saying, and this has been reported in the Telegraph newspaper this afternoon, among others, he's basically saying that this nightmare that the UK has been put through by the European Union negotiating team and its attitude has basically given a moment of pause to other populist movements around Europe. So he's basically saying that Europeans who might have wanted to follow the UK's lead, by Europeans, people, the peoples of Austria and Hungary and so on, who might have wanted to say, yes, we can leave as well. Verhofstadt, this complete cretin, is saying that, well, the way the UK has suffered in the negotiation and the nightmare that it has wrecked the Conservative Party, it's driven a massive division, dividing line down the Labour Party, all of this uncertainty and all of this madness has given others a moment of pause. Now, we did say this, didn't we, 2 years ago? They would make it a nightmare. A, to make sure that the UK doesn't leave, but B, to make sure that nobody else leaves. That's very simplistic. It's a bit more complicated than that, but he's been talking out today, crowing triumphantly, as a number of Conservative politicians today have come out and said that May's Chequers plan has no chance of getting through Parliament, that there are at least 80 Tories who won't vote for it, meaning that it's dead in the water, meaning that my scenario, where I predicted, didn't I, last year, I said that this would eventually wreck May and lead to another general election early in 2019. Now, I could be wrong, because I'm often wrong, but I said that this is the way it would go, and it is going like that. Whether we get that general election in early next year or not, I don't know. But we're not leaving the European Union at all. Right. What else have I got for you? I've got a few things. And I'm looking at the clock. It's nearly 19 minutes past the hour. I wanted to talk about this. If you're a long-time listener to the programme, you will be familiar with Virginia State Senator Richard Black. Lovely man. He's been on the programme 2 or 3 times in the last year or so. Well, he's been to Syria, has Richard Black. And over the weekend, I didn't see this in time. If I had seen it, I'd have gotten stuck into it and brought you some of the highlights on Sunday View. But as it is, I only saw this today. And the Independent newspaper in the UK, which sadly is out of print, it's online now. I don't mean sadly because I loved it, because it's a great paper. I don't mean that at all. But as newspapers are going out of print, not only in this country but all around the world, slowly but surely, I'm not contradicting what I said yesterday on Sunday View, by the way. The sales are still pretty good for newspapers in the country, but they are declining. But the Independent is reporting that Senator Richard Black, so he's been to Syria. He's met with Bashar al-Assad, again, not for the first time. And he's been talking about the end game. Because as you know, Russia and Syria have ramped up, they've begun an all-out offensive on jihadist positions in Idlib, which is the last stand in northern Syria, the last stand for these Western-backed nutters that have caused carnage in Syria over the last nearly a decade. Anyway, let's say 8-9 years. So he's there, and while he was there, obviously the Syrian press, but other journalists from the region spoke with him, and he dropped them a little bit of a bombshell. No big surprise to you or to me. But he said that he expects MI6, that's the UK's, Britain's MI6, he expects they are planning a fake chemical weapons attack on Syria. Obviously to be blamed on Syria. An attack in the country on innocent people, which would be later blamed on Syria, something we are pretty certain they have done before. It's a very interesting video. It's about 9 minutes long, and I only got to watch it just before coming on air, so I couldn't chop it up. But he's in a bunker, not because he's under attack or anything, but he's speaking to an assembled press corps, and he's talking about this offensive on al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, ISIS, these jihadists, and what it means and why it's important that it succeeds. But it's very interesting. But the Independent, to be fair to it, has reported that Richard Black has said that not only would MI6 be planning another false flag chemical attack, but he also said they have done it before. And the Independent online has basically reported what he said word for word, and I think that can't be a bad thing. So there you are. What is the BBC saying about the offensive in Idlib? Well, it's not saying very much. It's saying that over the last few days, airstrikes have targeted eastern and southern parts of the city, as well as Hama, which is a province which borders Idlib there. And that's all it's saying, really. It's got the usual little footnote from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, this absolute clown, this little rotund t-shirt seller who's based in Coventry, this guy who spent time in jail in Syria, this buffoon who from Coventry makes up stories about people being killed in Syria by the government. It's all anti-government stuff, and he puts it out there, and the world's media gleefully regurgitate it to their unsuspecting audiences. 23 minutes past the hour. Time is moving on. We'd better crack on and get Dean Henderson on the show. Very quick break. Before that, though, let me remind you, if you've got something to tweet to me, tweet it to @Richie Allen Show. That's my Twitter handle. You can email the programme, but it's not fast, and there's no guarantee I'll get it during the show. So it's @Richie Allen Show on Twitter. This is Monday's show. Dean Henderson is next, and Allyn Condon will join me in the second hour of the programme. Serious stuff today. Thanks for joining me. Are we going to get that little break in? We are. Back in a minute.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Introducing the H2O app, a powerful water structuring application that programs vibrational energies into water through the use of different sound frequencies. Once programmed, the use of water for drinking, cooking, bathing. Give it to your friends and colleagues or spread it around the garden. The list goes on. It's not just water that the app can be used for either. It's great for programming crystals too. The H2O app is free to download and is available on both Android and Apple platforms. For further information, go to h2oapp.online.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Welcome back to the programme. We're approaching 25 minutes past the hour. This is Monday's show. Excuse that rude interruption there. That was me leaving a fader up. Don't leave the fader up. They teach you that on day one of presenting school. But it's been so long ago now. I've forgotten all that basic stuff, you see. Right, lots of tweets coming in. Let me read just a couple of them. Hi to John Smith. Sky News on Saturday said Russia and Syria were conducting violent airstrikes. Violent airstrikes? As opposed to what, says John. That's a good point. Derek tweets, all right, Richie, there are two new so-called nationalist parties in Ireland at the moment. Irexit, Freedom to Prosper, and the National Party. Yes, they look very much more of the same old shite to me. I was aware of that, Derek. I did invite the leader of Irexit on the programme. He's either not seen my tweet or he's ignored it. But anyway, I did put a call out to them. Thanks for the info, mate. I really appreciate that. Right-dio, so shall we get our first guest on the show? I think we should. He's no stranger to you. He is a brilliant geopolitical analyst and broadcaster whose work has been featured by RT, by Press TV, and by radio stations and TV channels around the world. His books are terrific. Check out hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. That's where you'll find him. I've been speaking with him for many years. He was on with me most recently, I think back in June, with his lovely wife Jill, and they were talking about their most recent book, which is called Illuminati Agenda 21, which I highly recommend, by the way. That's Illuminati Agenda 21, and you can find that at hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. And I don't recommend very much, as you know, but I'm recommending that. Dean Henderson, welcome back to the programme. How are you?
Good, Richie. How are you doing?
I'm not too shabby. It's good to be back, my friend. Thanks, and it's good to have you on. It's been about 3 months since we spoke. There's a lot to get into. I want to ask you this. Just, I'm going to throw a curveball at you there. But I know you bat with a straight bat, so you'll be able to deflect it away. I'm not going to talk about September the 11th on tomorrow's programme, because I can't do anything more with it. Is there any new way of approaching September the 11th, which has got to be the most obvious example of a false flag event or operation that there's ever been It's a story that's so laughably ludicrous that I can't find any new ways of introducing that to people. And there aren't too many people whom I know that know more about it than you and have written about it as you have. What do you do with 9/11?
I think you're doing just the right thing, Richie. Just ignore it, because one of the big things with 9/11 is it's kind of this mass trauma event. I feel like JFK assassination was like that. And, you know, Kissinger called it the new Pearl Harbor that they needed to launch this project for a new American century war to, you know, overthrow 7 different governments in different countries. And Iran, of course, being the 7th, Syria the 6th. All you need to know about 9/11, we'll talk about it now a little bit, what the heck, but ignore it tomorrow, I think is the thing, because every time they bring that up, it brings back the fear in people. And that's the idea of these mass trauma events that they do. But all you need to know about it was the Illuminati. When I saw the towers go down that morning, I said to my wife, I said, it's the Illuminati. And I had no evidence at that time yet at all. But all you need to know is the company that ran Securicom, which is now Securisec, was a Crown Agency corporation. And they had the contract on the World Trade Center for security. Marvin Bush was the CEO. It's George Bush's brother. And then within about an hour of the event, Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida, was flying to Washington with these dossiers on these hijackers, which the Mossad, which was the contractor for this operation, as they often are for the Crown, he brought all this Huffman Aviation information on how these guys trained and everything, even though the training was dismal and none of them could even hardly get the thing off the ground or to land. He brought them all up there, so they had the dossiers on these guys. So Securicom, Securisec, Crown Agency, not to mention the fact that the Aga Khan Foundation, which cranks out all these Islamists, whether it's Boko Haram or El Shabaab or Mujahideen or Al Qaeda or ISIS, the latest, greatest ISIS, because it's the eye of the Illuminati time, so they had to throw ISIS in our face, the name ISIS, because they worship ISIS, because underneath the patriarchy, there's a secret matriarchy that they use to control us. That's a whole nother thing. But all you need to know is the Crown did 9/11, and the Crown also assassinated Kennedy out of Jamaica. Sir William Stephenson, Intrepid was his code name. He was an MI6 agent, M16 agent, whatever. And they ran it out through Brinco, and they ran it through Schlumberger. It was financed by the oligarchs of Europe, a lot of white Russians, a lot of Polish solidarist families. The Radziwill family was a big one. Through RCA Corporation, which became owned by General Electric, which is also a Crown Agency corporation, as was RCA, as is Lockheed Martin, the biggest defense contractor in the world. So it all goes back to the Crown, and someday, maybe people are going to wake up to this and quit fighting these little battles against these little junior partners, because it's a waste of time. But I think you're doing exactly the right thing, Richie, by not talking about it tomorrow. I'm going to do the same exact thing. Just go on with your life. A lot of this stuff, this puppet show, this constant puppet show, virtual reality, perception management puppet show that they do, a lot of us just go on with your life because all they're trying to do is screw with your head, with the media being in Latin meaning medium, which means to get in between us. Instead of talking on the street with people, we're constantly on our screens, and the medium is telling us to basically be divided against each other and to fight each other and to go to the extreme right or the extreme left or the extreme whatever and just kind of go nuts. And that's kind of where people are at right now. So the last thing we need really is to talk about 9/11 tomorrow.
Brilliant. That segues brilliantly into an article I sent you today. It's funny, Dean, the one I sent you was one of many. The Telegraph newspaper here in the UK also ran a feature about the rise in populism and the rise in nationalism. Now, those aren't new articles. This has been discussed for months and maybe even for a couple of years, maybe, going back before the election of Donald Trump. But what I'm really interested in exploring, and I'm really keen to get your take on this, and I'm going to give over the programme to you now for a few minutes, and I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm fascinated by these movements. I think the people whom are affected by the nightmare scenarios that we witness all the time, the wars, the mass murder, the poverty, the sickness, the blood sacrifices that you've talked about and written about in your amazing books, the people who are affected by them are genuine. So when Joe Smith or Josephine Smith runs off to join a far right party or a far left party. Those people are genuine. Whether they're right or wrong, well, that's up for debate, but they have a genuine feeling for the need for something to make sense of the world. But I'm very interested in the institutions that they run towards. How genuine are these institutions? These right-wing parties that are doing well in Italy and Austria and Hungary and elsewhere, how genuine are those? And if we start to scratch beneath the surface of those parties, are we actually finding that it's just another version of the system? And I think that's a really important area of discussion right now, I think, in the madness of the world that we exist in. What are they running to? Are they running to something that is genuine or something that has been created specifically to snare them? What do you think? Yeah, brilliant question. Again, that's exactly what we need to be talking about right now, especially in light of this recent Alex Jones thing that happened, because I've been really thinking about this too. And well, see, it starts with economic deprivation. So you create a world where the rich just own everything. The oligarchy is firmly in control. There's no unions that can fight him anymore. There's no resistance from anywhere against this oligarchy really anymore. And so now the next phase, because you have to understand the Illuminati at their core, they're Nazis. They're far-right Nazis. They're eugenicists. This is why they're into DNA, collecting the DNA of every citizen on planet Earth right now, because they're obsessed with bloodlines. They're white supremacists at their core, Aryan supremacists really, and they really think they got it all figured out that way. And so, absolutely right. The people that get caught up in this stuff, good people. The institutions themselves. So where did the alt-right, the so-called alt-right, where did that come from? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from the establishment. And now they're in a phase, I think, where they have such firm control over the planet. And they've used this Hegelian dialectic of theirs to divide people over the years. You know, they came up with communism, but it wasn't really communism. It was state capitalism in the Soviet Union. You know, Trotsky was funded by Kuhn-Loeb Banking Corporation when he sailed out of New York. Lenin was brought into Russia. The Warburg family financed his entry into Russia. If the Mensheviks had won that revolution, which they were going to do, left to their own devices, there would have been an anarchist, decentralized, genuine left-wing revolution in Russia against the Hohenzollern family, the Tsar and his family. But no, they didn't want that. So they brought in these phony Bolsheviks, mostly Mossad, Zionists to the core, and just did a bloodbath. And 1917, when the revolution happened, Chase Manhattan had set up actually a bank in Moscow the same exact year. And so then it was always state capitalism. It was always being controlled from the outside. And part of what they were doing was a big part of what they were doing was trying to permanently discredit the word communism or socialism, because they have to do that. And yeah, it's just an ism, but it does matter because it means just sharing resources. It means setting up governments that actually share the wealth of the people, that have a fairly egalitarian structure. It doesn't have to be this centralized, top-down, authoritarian thing, but that's exactly what they presented to the world with the Soviet Union, so that the world would forever run away from those two words. And by the way, those two words were basically how humankind has lived for hundreds of thousands of years before the black nobility seized all the assets, stole all the assets of the indigenous people, hoarded them, took them to Rome and started the Holy Roman Empire with those assets. So that's exactly how people lived. I mean, Indian tribes were socialist, communist, sharing type people, where very egalitarian. There was no chiefs in these tribes. That's just a white fabrication. There was councils. The chiefs even were made up by the white, twisted Royal Geographic Society social Darwinists, who think there's this pyramid structure to reality in nature, which is just the biggest lie that we're living under. So now I think, anyway, they're at this point where they really have consolidated their control. So what they're going to do now is they're going to go kind of overt Nazi on us. They're going to try to. And this is where the alt-right comes in. So they make Alex Jones this kind of,
martyr for the alt-right movement to gain sympathy for him. Trump, by the way, used this alt-right big time to get elected. The alt-right itself, if you listen to what they say, they spend most of their time running down socialism and communism, running down people like me and you, running down progressive ideas of any kind. And so really they're marching these people out now as this alternative. And why? Because their real goal is to crush, again, the real genuine left. The real genuine, if you look at what's really happening on Facebook and who's really being banned, Alex Jones is just a red herring, because who's really being banned is all these Latin American revolutionary news services, for example, out of Venezuela, a lot of different places down there. They're going after the left-wing media. I mean, the true left. And this is the other part of it. They march Hillary Clinton around, or Corbyn around, or even Bernie Sanders around, who caved in. And they say, oh, this is the left, or these people over here with the orange hair who want to be, they're boys and they want to be girls. This is the left. And this is what they're putting this perception in people's head that is the left. But that is not the left. That is, again, that part too is funded by the establishment, by the Clinton Foundation. They fund Stand and Resist. They fund all this middle of the road, watered down version of, let's protest against the immigrants, or for the immigrants, or let's protest for gay rights or against gay rights. And it's just all these social issues that really don't mean anything. And so they've used this part of the Illuminati conspiracy, the so-called left, which is just sort of not quite as far right. There's Nazis, and then there's sort of proto-Nazis, and these are the so-called left, you see. And so the proto-Nazis, they want to save the immigrants, and they want to flood them into Europe. And George Soros funds the whole thing with his Open Society Foundation, and all these words like open and tolerance and sustainable development. This is all Agenda 21 language. This is all what you want to do now is you want to close down shop, and you want to protect your family, and you want to be intolerant to evil, and you want to stay away from these two phony alternatives that you supposedly have. Or there's actually three. There's the Trumpers who think, QAnon's going to come and save us, even though it's just another NSA operation to brainwash people into being complacent. Then there's the Hillary Clinton apologists who can't admit they cheated on Sanders, so they're just going to stand and resist. But mostly they're sitting and spinning mostly. And then the third alternative is the alt-right. That's your alternatives. But you notice they never really give the other alternative, which is the revolutionary left, and which is their biggest fear, which they're just scared of this thing, because that's the only thing. That's the only, you can have alt-right, you can have an alt-right, discussion about these conspiracies and all this stuff. But if you have the same exact solutions, the same can be said of the libertarians. The libertarians are all funded by Cato Institute, DuPont, ExxonMobil. The biggest oil polluters in the world fund the Libertarian Party in this country. So these libertarians, they're good people. Like you say, they're all good people, but they're caught up in a system where they don't even know what the other real alternatives are to these three establishment alternatives.
Let me jump in. This is brilliant. Let me jump in. So what is the revolutionary left then? If the revolutionary left, which is an alternative, as you believe, it is an alternative to the madness, but obviously it doesn't get discussed. The left, of course, has been hijacked. I mean, in this country, it was hijacked by Tony Blair and his posse of psychopaths when John Smith died in, I don't know what year, John, was it 1993, was it 94 when John Smith died, forgive me. So they hijacked, and of course they weren't socialists at all, or anything like it. They were nothing like it, but they campaigned under the banner of the left, but they weren't the left. What is the revolutionary left? Is it Bolivar, basically? Is it Chavez? Is that what the left should look like?
Yeah, that's right. You don't find it in the developed world. You will have a hard time finding any sort of genuine revolutionary left anymore. In America, it's the same way. Clinton hijacked the Democrat Party in the same exact way that Tony Blair hijacked the Labour Party, called it New Labour, right? And so what did he do? He deregulated the city of London even more, made it even harder for the UK or London proper to do anything with this entity in its midst. And then Clinton, with his Democrat Leadership Council, DLC, was all about triangulation, he called it. And so you basically appease the right wing, and you peel away some people there, and it's just a lurch to the center. But really, again, it's not the center. It's to the we're already on the center. We were already on the center with Jimmy Carter, and maybe even right of center already. And I'd say Britain was in the same boat with Gordon Brown, maybe. And then, then it went just crazy right. And so, yeah, it's the Bolivarian left. It's the revolutionary movements that happened that people are being basically conditioned to forget about. The revolution in Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF. This is why they're always going after Zimbabwe, trying to overthrow that government with their phony business boys, IMF poster boys that protest against the election results. Now, that's a revolutionary country. That's a country where there was land reform. That's a country where every person, I've been there. I've never been to an African country where there are more educated people who you could have an intellectual discussion with. Poor as all get out. But why? Because the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve trashed their currency, and they added about 7 zeros to it, and you had to get a wheelbarrow to push the stuff around. But they attacked these people. Okay, yeah, so yeah, Chavez, and I think Maduro. Maduro's not as charismatic, but I think he's trying. You have Correa, you have in Bolivia, you have Evo Morales. Cuba, still a revolutionary country. Syria with Assad. This is what they don't tell us about Syria. They want us to think, Assad's just a butcher or whatever. Assad's a socialist. Assad is a pan-Arabist. Assad, a pan-African, pan-Arabist. Gaddafi was a pan-Africanist, very revolutionary. This is revolutionary left. Iran, I would argue, got over the sort of mullah complex that we tried to install in 79 when the revolution occurred, because that revolution was led by the Fayadeen and the Tudeh party. Those were two revolutionary left parties in Iran. They didn't want anything to do with the Islamist mullahs at all. And so what the CIA did was they flew in the Ayatollah Khomeini. He flew in on a plane sitting next to his CIA handler because they had to head off that left-wing revolution and turn it into an Islamist thing. But I think Iran has gotten through that and over that. And while the mullahs still are there, I think the majority of the country, with their resistance economy, they call it, has turned back to the left. And the same in Iraq. The Communist Party won that last election. The mainstream media didn't even report that. But the Shiites won it. No, the Communist Party won it. There's parties in Iraq too. It's not like the Shiite party or the Sunni party or that's just like sixth grade talk from the TV. There's a Communist Party in Iraq. It's always been powerful. They were the first country to nationalize their oil company in 1956. They got rid of their king before any Middle Eastern country did, sent him packing, and nationalized their oil company and got the revenue. And that was the Communist Party. And Saddam Hussein was actually used by the CIA to assassinate Karim al-Qassim, who was a communist president before Saddam. And then Saddam got in. And then guess what? Saddam had to go left because the Communist Party and the people in Iraq are so ingrained in left-wing politics that they pushed him to the left, forced him to the left to be able to stay in power. And that's when we took him out. And the same with Noriega in Panama. Noriega was moving to the left when we took him out. I mean, it just terrifies them. This revolutionary left politics terrifies them because this is where you start nationalizing central banks, nationalizing oil companies, and basically seizing the assets of these vampire parasites who have stolen all of our stuff, all of our assets, taking it for themselves, fraudulently, through brutality, through war, just seize the assets. They've been doing this ever since the Knights Templar did it way back then. They're still doing it. This permanent war economy, everybody talks about it like it's some new thing. This has been happening for 10 centuries now? Yeah. And it's the sick city of London, used to be a Roman Empire, Freemason, Scientologists, who really believe they got it all figured out, and they're so smart, and they're some of the dumbest people you could ever meet. I've met some. And they just, they think might is right. They think that's the way nature functions because they don't go outside much. They don't live on farms. They don't cut their own wood like I was doing this morning. And they don't have a clue about how nature works at all. I grew up on a farm. I know how it works. I've been all over in nature, and I know how it works. These guys are city people. They're always on the defense. They think if they take the first strike against their neighbor, by God, then their neighbor can't take the first strike against them. I mean, that's their mentality. They live in constant fear, and that's who's running the world. And so the last thing they want is a dignified approach where, it's turned on its head. All of a sudden, the poor people are calling the shots. All of a sudden, there's mass involvement in government, which there is in Venezuela. The last thing they want is liberation theology, this movement in the Catholic Church, which has contributed to a lot of these revolutions, which says, hey, the people tell the priest what the Bible says, what Jesus said. Then the priest tells the bishop, then the bishop, the archbishop, and on up the line to the Pope. And we're going to turn that pyramid upside down on its head to where the people are going to tell the Pope how to run it. And they don't like that stuff at all. That's why they've gone to the Pentecostals and the crazy evangelicals all over Latin America, and they've tried to push the Catholic Church aside. And that's, by the way, why they're always attacking the Catholic Church on pedophilia. Not that that's not horrible, but how much pedophilia goes on in the Rothschild City of London circles and never gets talked about.
Lots. There's a lot of tweets coming in. I want to get to a couple of them. A couple of really good questions come in for you. Dean Henderson is our guest. hendersonftuck.wordpress.com. There's a lot in that. It's not highbrow, but it's very detailed. It's highbrow. I don't mean to say it's not highbrow. I'm saying it's not going over my head, and I'm sure it's not going over the heads of our listeners, but there's a lot of detail in that. These guys like Morales and Chavez and Maduro latterly, Bolivar going back, are we to really believe? Now, I'd like to believe this, and I have my own opinions as somebody who studied history academically. Are we to really believe that these people, these men, wanted to basically return the means of production to the people? That they genuinely wanted to no longer do business with parasitic mega corporations, with global corporations? That they wanted to create utopian societies where every man, woman and child had an equal share, as equal as the leader of that country, had an equal share in the success of the country as defined by the policies that they wanted to enact. I could have said that a far simpler way. Were these guys as saintly, as Christ-like as we want to believe they were?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's always, going over the top and you sort of idolize these people, and you should never do that with anyone. Everyone's fallible. There's nobody that's attained that sort of dharma that I'm aware of as far as like a president. But I'll give you a couple examples. Ho Chi Minh, when he took over in Hanoi, he lived in a shack behind the palace where the French and U.S.-backed puppets had always taken up residence, and he refused to live in that palace. He lived in his shack. He ate rice 3 meals a day to the day he died. His one vice was he did smoke Marlboro cigarettes, right, which he kind of made a joke about, that he was ashamed of. So there was a guy that, and I've read, books by certain people. Ho Chi Minh, he was part of the Illuminati. Yeah, whatever. Or Mao Zedong was part of, yeah. But these are these alt-right crazy people who just do anything they can to discredit the word socialism and communism. And so they come up with this stuff that has no evidence, no backing. And I'll give you another example, Gaddafi. Okay, so Libya. So Libya had a per capita income that was over twice as high as the next African country, which is South Africa. Libya, if you got sick in Libya, your health care was free. If you got a free house, you got free food. You got free education. If you got really sick and needed an operation, he would fly people, not he, but the state of Libya would fly people to Europe to have operations and pay for everything. After a couple got married in Libya, they were flown to Europe for a honeymoon on the state of Libya, gratis. And this was all based on the fact that they owned their oil and that was nationalized. And they own their central bank, and they could do whatever they wanted with it. And so in a sense, and I don't know if you ever read Gaddafi's Green Book, but for all the listeners, everyone should find that book and read it before it's banned completely from every library on earth. But Gaddafi wrote a book called The Green Book, and it wasn't the Red Book, it wasn't because he wasn't a Marxist, dogmatic. And see, I don't like that stuff either when it gets like that. That creeps me out. I'm not a fan of Karl Marx in a lot of sense. I think he had some points, but on the other hand, he had some stupid stuff. But, Gaddafi called himself an anarcho-syndicalist. And I like that because I tend to think of myself as like a left-wing anarchist. But really, decentralization is important. And nobody should ever be over anybody else. We don't need patriarchy. We don't need matriarchy. We don't need oligarchy. we don't need any hierarchy. We don't need anybody over anybody else. We need to all treat each other as equals, and including in a government that we set up. So Gaddafi really did set it up that way, and he really did literally live in the desert in a tent and didn't have really any day-to-day control over that government. That is a fact. Not only did the people own the means of production in Libya, owned every factory, this is in the Green Book, but they actually decided what was to be made at the factory. In other words, what does the country need from us that we can, make, that everybody needs? And then, of course, they didn't sell it to them. They just gave it to them. Can you even imagine that? We can't even imagine that, and yet they had the highest per capita income in Africa, more than twice that of South Africa.
Two quick questions. 30,000 a year, was it? Two quick questions on that. I know, not so much anymore. I don't know them anymore, but I used to know Libyans here in Manchester, and decent people. And they, along with a lot of other Libyans, would say that whatever you and I might think about the ideas that he had for utopia, for his people, the fact remains, they would argue, that he was brutal in his treatment of those who didn't agree with him. Now, Chavez has been accused of that. Other socialist leaders whom were toppled by US and the US allies' interventions over the years, the CIA, of course, and the destabilization in Central America. What about the charge that these guys ultimately, as long as you agreed with their vision of life and of reality, everything was hunky-dory, but if you didn't, unspeakable things could be done to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. Neither one of us were there. One thing I will say is that when you have these people who have fled the country, like these Libyans in Manchester, it's the same over here. It's like the Cubans in South Florida. All of them are extremely right-wing. All of them hate Castro, hated him, hate Raul Castro just as bad, hate the revolution. They left Libya for a reason. A lot of them were crooks. A lot of them were working with the CIA, running drugs, doing prostitution for Batista. So I don't know. I just wonder how many of these Libyans were, I'm sure they were nice people, but a lot of times when you find these people, first of all, how did they have the money to get to Manchester to live in,
Well, look, that's a good point, that. And I take that point on board, and I can't claim to be objective here. I can't, because I have a lot of sympathy with the arguments you're making. I've met people over the years whom they think very much like you, Dean. They are humanitarian in their outlook on life. They are fair in their outlook on life. I've actually met people who absolutely, this is true now, I'm not making this up, they despise Ho Chi Minh and Chavez and others. And when I say to them, because I'm incredulous, why? And they say how naive these guys were to not know it was inevitable that there was going to be destabilization efforts coming from outside the country, and B, they never did anything to prevent that. A lot of anger from people who believed in Chavez and others, but are apoplectic now and crestfallen that it hasn't succeeded, because they actually blame the leaders and Che Guevara and others and say, these fools, they must have known what was going to happen. Brilliant stuff. Let me get you some, because if I don't ask these questions, and we've got about 15 minutes left today, Jesus, it's flying by, and I don't mean to be blasphemous when I say that. Dean Henderson, hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com is our guest. If you haven't read Dean's books, they are absolutely brilliant. He's one of the best briefed guests that has ever come on this programme, and there are links to his books and his most recent book, written with his wife Jill as well, Illuminati Agenda 21. I probably said that the wrong way around, but go to hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. A question from William Henderson in a minute, but a question from Mwinga, and I think Mwinga is of African descent, and he asks a good question. Richie, ask Dean, has he any thoughts on the land reform in South Africa? Now, for our listeners, when the ANC came to power in the 1990s, they wanted to repeal a land act from the early 20th century, which made it impossible for blacks basically to have land and have farms. At least I think I've got that right. I've not used Wikipedia, I've not been lazy. And they wanted to reverse that, and they wanted to give poor farmers, and well, they weren't farmers, they'd worked for whites historically. They wanted to give them land and give them access to farms. So Moinga is asking, what do you think of that? Presumably it's a loaded question, because there are those who would say that by redistribution that land, it's basically caused farms to fail and it's screwed everything up. This is a real liberal argument. Go ahead, Dean. What do you think?
Yeah, well, yeah, and first, to your point about these people who are disappointed in Chavez and kind of blame him for being naive. I mean, I think that's just like blaming the victim, and it's just exactly what the Illuminati bankers want us to do. It's like somebody tries to do the right thing, and then they fail because the man steps on their neck. And then instead of blaming the man for stepping on their neck, we blame them. And it's part of the disease. It's part of the sickness. And that's these kind of liberal, gatekeeper, fearful types who just, they don't quite have enough faith. They don't quite have enough courage. So they're just kind of on the fence, and they're just kind of waiting for the far left or whatever, the revolutionaries to fail. And then they say, oh, we told you so. So these people kind of make me more sick than the establishment themselves. I would call them kind of minions, and I would call the systems of vampires. And I wrote a column last week. It was called Minions Feeding Vampires. And people like me are the food, They love to feed us to the vampires when we fail at our efforts, And they won't ever thank you for trying. But back to the land reform. I think the land reform is essential. I think land reform is essential everywhere. This is one of the biggest issues on the planet right now, and it has been for a long time. But in the developed world now is where we really need it. Nobody's talking about it. In America, for example, 300 years ago, like 1% of the population lived in cities and 99% lived on the land. And now it's just the opposite. 1% live on the land, 99% live in cities. So what happened? Well, the short story of history, and this is the short story of all history. People say, well, how did this all happen? Well, the short answer is they stole our land. They stole our land. These bankers create fractional reserve money out of nothing. They get people in debt fraudulently, and then they come in and they seize the real assets when they create a depression, like the land, like the house, like the car, the real assets. And the biggest of those is land, because if people have land, that in itself is kind of a revolutionary situation where people actually, my God, have they're
independent. They are. If you own your own land, you are. If you can grow your own food and you're not dependent on somebody else, you are truly independent, right?
It's the means of production. You own the means of production, just like we were talking about. So it has to be done right. Obviously, I mean, the land reform in South Africa definitely should start with the gold mines. Because if you go to Botswana, I've been to both countries. Botswana gets 50% of the royalties off of their gold, and the platinum and all that stuff. And the standard of living in Botswana is much, much higher than in South Africa, where the government gets nothing from those royalties off the Rothschilds, Oppenheimers, Anglo-American De Beers monopoly, diamonds too. So that should start there. Of course, it should be done right to where you're not trying to create animosity between the Boers and the blacks, because the Boers still own a lot of land. There's this historical animosity between there. But I'll tell you one thing, in South Africa, it is the most backwards place. I was there in 2009, well after the ANC took power. And even though they had political power, they didn't have any economic clout. So, yeah, everywhere you went, the blacks were the gardeners. The blacks were basically the slaves still, it looked like to me. Or the whites would say, don't take the bush taxis because they're dangerous. And then we'd take the bush taxis. Jill and I would take them everywhere. And we were the only white people on there. And what they really meant was black people are dangerous. Yeah. So there's a lot of racism, oh my God, from the whites to the blacks. And that's kind of coming back a little bit. And that's what the government has to do. They have to temper that down.
You and I, by the way.
This is about economics. This isn't about skin color. This is about economics and fairness. So they have to do that, or there's going to be excesses. And that's the kind of thing where the CIA would come in and try to cause excesses to discredit the land reform. So
I can see how that works, and you've explained that brilliantly. I know there will be... The program does attract, and I'm glad it does, because they are, not to patronise them, they are welcome to listen, and they are welcome to come on and challenge these ideas, and they won't be ridiculed or mocked for doing it. But we do get a lot of libertarians who listen, and sometimes they think I'm a libertarian because of some of the things that I say. But I try to kind of move away from, kind of identity politics and not to pigeonhole myself as you do. I think at the best of times, both of us do that. This thing about, and I totally understand, it did happen when you and Jill were down in South Africa, and of course, stay away from them, the witch doctors and the cannibals, and they want revenge now. They want revenge. Stay away from them. They want revenge. One thing you and I might get into a good argument about in the future, because we've not had enough proper arguments, you and I, but this progressive nonsense that our opinions are formed by our birth, through our birth, right? So if you're white and you're Christian and you're born in Northern Europe, you've got some sort of subconscious bias going on, and whether you like it or not, you've got cultural bias against minorities and all that. Now, I don't think you believe that, but this is coming up a lot lately, and it really, really pisses me off. This idea that I can't have any real opinion on what Africans are doing, or what Asians are doing, or what Orientals are doing because of my white privilege, and this just absolutely boils my urine, my wee-wee. I'm not. I know you're not saying any of that, but it's very crap. It's very interesting, crap. Right?
That's that controlled opposition stuff. That's that Illuminati left. That's the Illuminati left talking, because they always want to divide. And this time along color lines, and they want to make you feel guilty. These people make you feel more guilty than the Catholic Church. Richie.
Yeah.
I mean, really, right. It's all about guilt and shame, which are the two worst emotions you can have, because, it just destroys your energy. It just destroys everything. So no, it's crap. There's nothing predestined about anything, and there's nothing divine about any kind of skin color. Nobody gets a free pass. I've lived in black neighborhoods, and if black people do me wrong, I call them out just like I call a white person out. But see, that's the way to do it. Just treat everybody equal. It's not about they're better than us, and it's not about they're worse than us, and the liberals almost treat them like they're gods. If you're black, you're like a god now or something. You get special privileges or something. And the conservatives just, treat them with contempt. But it's all sort of this form of racism. It's all sort of buying into the divide and conquer strategy of the Illuminati, and so we just don't want to do that, and we don't want to. Nobody's a prima donna. Nobody gets a free pass, and people are people, and we have to remember, we have to keep our eye on the system, and that's what these politically correct crazy people aren't doing. They don't want to police the system. They don't want to attack the real source of the problem, which is the Federal Reserve and the money system and the corporatocracy and all that stuff. No, so they're cowards. So what do? They go after, me and you if we say a wrong word, like, if we say fuck. Oh my God. He said fuck. I said fuck. You got a problem with that?
He doesn't think a transgender woman is a real woman, so he's a hateful bastard. He should be banned.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they're not. That's
a fact.
That's the biological reality. Okay, so they can say whatever they want.
And it doesn't matter that you, as a human being and as a humanitarian, is not only genuinely 100% happy for people to live as they want to live, so long as they're not annoying anybody else. So I don't mean annoying, but so long as they're not imposing it on anybody else. And it doesn't matter that the last thing in the world you would do is, for example, leave a public house, a pub or a bar because a transgender person comes in. Doesn't matter. You've got to think a certain way. We are approaching 6 minutes past the hour, and we really have about 11 minutes left on this. It's flown by. So I want to jump in to a question asked by William Henderson, presumably no relation. William is in Scotland, but he might be, of course, a distant relative. You never know. William asks, would Dean agree that the US, America, never actually got independence at all from the UK? And also, would Dean agree that Israel calls the shots over the UK and the US? That's obviously a two-part question. If America never got independence from the UK, that would imply the UK, London still controls the US. But William is saying then, ultimately, would you agree with him, presuming he believes it, that Israel, the Zionists basically are running things full stop? I know it's a long one, and we've only got 11 minutes, but jump right in there.
Well, yes and no, because yes, it's true that we never got independence from, and they're not the UK, but the Crown. We got independence from the UK. But we didn't get independence from the Crown, which the Crown doesn't mean the Windsor family. The Crown means the black nobility that intermarried with the Sephardic Jewish banking monopolies like the Rothschilds to create this bank hegemony. And so Alexander Hamilton, our first Treasury Secretary in 1789, won the argument, and we started the Bank of the United States, which was a private central bank largely controlled by the Rothschilds. And he was himself a Rothschild agent. And then there's a lot of history. I did a talk on Fairfield, Iowa a couple weeks ago on the Federal Reserve and got into all this. But, so at times, like Andrew Jackson got us free. So he got our debt down to zero. We had zero debt under Andrew Jackson, the United States. And that's because he abolished the Bank of the United States. That was his platform when he ran for president, and it was wildly popular. So he got rid of it for a while. So we went to zero. So there was a time there when we actually were kind of independent from the crown. And then they brought it back, and Lincoln tried to get rid of it, the second Bank of the United States, and they assassinated him. So there was a brief period. That's why the Civil War happened. That was the main reason. Slavery was the second main reason. But slavery was being run by the crown, and the planters in the South were all crown agents. And Lehman Brothers made a bunch of money smuggling cotton, which was all about cotton plantations. That's what slavery was about, and that was all about the crown. And so we got our independence again for a little while. And then we lost it. And then 1913, Woodrow Wilson, Federal Reserve, Paul Warburg, Rockefeller's agent Nelson Aldrich convinced him to start the Federal Reserve. So then we lost our independence again. And when he did that, he got rid of all the tariffs, which financed all of the U.S. government up to that point. Tariffs on the East India Company, Standard Oil, the big monopolies. We didn't have an income tax. Well, 2 years later, here comes the income tax amendment, 16th Amendment, never ratified. So all of a sudden the middle class is paying the bills. So again, we lost our independence again then. And so we're still living under the Crown, Crown Agency Corporation. We're a corporation. The United States is a corporation. They run it out of the District of Columbia. That's one of the districts that the Crown has. And now the second question is, does Israel run City of London? No, it's the other way around. And this is where a lot of people, I feel, need to think about things. 1917, Balfour Declaration. That was World War I. Walter Rothschild sent a letter to Alfred Balfour calling for the creation of Israel. World War II comes around. 1942, Crown still has a non-aggression treaty with Hitler. Crown created Hitler. That's why we got all this Freemason crazy stuff, Real Society, Theosophical Society, Black Magic, all that stuff. All that came from the City of London Masons. And then the Duke of Wellington, when Hitler finally gave up on this stuff, and said, wait a minute, the Crown's using me, I'm being used here. Duke of Wellington had Rudolf Hess parachute into his castle and tell him this stuff, and then they went after Hitler after that. But then the Balfour Declaration was implemented in 1947 after the war. And how was it implemented? It was implemented through genocide in Germany against poor Jewish people. The wealthy Zionists paid $1,000 to a guy named Rosenstein, who was Jewish. That was Hitler's emigration secretary. He was Jewish. And the wealthy Zionists moved into Israel. And Israel is just another district of the Crown. That's just another district over there. The Saudi Arabians run part of that district too, and they're Muslims. So it has nothing to do with Jewish or Muslim or nothing. That's another divide and conquer thing, another red herring. It just has to do with an empire that never went away, an empire that started in Rome, that moved to the City of London when the Catholic Church went after it, and that still runs the world and never died. The British Empire didn't die. The Holy Roman Empire didn't die either. It's just the British Empire now. And that's who runs the world. And they do it through the Commonwealth, of course, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Nigeria, Malaysia, on and on, members of the Commonwealth. This thing needs to be busted up. This is what needs to be busted up. It's this 1 square mile thing called the City of London. And so yes and no, but I really, to me, it's just so important for people to understand where the real power emanates, because they're going to lie to you all the time. They're going to tell you, George Bush is Tony Blair, or no, Tony Blair is George Bush's poodle. No, George Bush was the black nobility's poodle. Donald Trump is another one of their poodles. Hillary Clinton is another one of their poodles. Robert Mueller is another one of their poodles that they want to use to take us to war with Russia. Because the whole thing with Russiagate, it's not about Trump, it's about Russia. And it's just a puppet show. Everything else is a puppet show, the big puppet show. So I would just say, I know it's like a broken record with me, but people really need to get up to speed on the City of London Rothschild banking cartel, because that's what runs Israel. That's what runs Saudi. That's what runs the United States. They have little roles for every country. Every country has a role. whether it's a cotton plantation or a mercenary army or a secret agent Mecca like Israel is that divides the Arabs, or a funder of covert operations, which is what the Saudi purpose is, or a high technology nightmare, which is what they're turning China into. Or they make cars. That's Japan. Let's see. So I mean, they farmed out all these roles, and they're just sitting there laughing at us because we can't figure it out. Because we actually think there's these things called nation states in the world. Ha ha ha! They're all just corporations of the crown.
This is mind blowing stuff for a lot of people. And I've had an email from Phil Restino, who's a friend of mine based in Florida. Phil is a veteran and an anti-war activist. Amazing guy, Phil. And he said he'd love to see video presentations done by you going through some of this. And I know time constraints, and I know finances and everything, but it's made for a 3, 4 or 6 part series, Dean. It really is. There's nobody on top of it like you are that I've ever met anyway. I mean that. It's fascinating stuff. It's real deep stuff, this, you know. It's easy for me to give cliff notes and to try and explain why it doesn't matter whether it's Trump Sanders, whether it's Trump Clinton, whether it's Bill Clinton, whether it's Bush or Obama, or whether it's Jeremy Corbyn, or it doesn't matter. It's just air strokes. It's airbrushing. What you do is you drill down into it and you go into it historically, as you have done in your books, which are amazing. Folks, it's 14 minutes past the hour. We're just out of time with Dean, but I'm going to invite Dean back on next month to get more into this, because there's a lot to cover here. And in the meantime, go to hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. The books, there are links there to the books, including the recent Illuminati Agenda 21 book co-written with Jill. That's hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. That was one of the quickest 45 minutes I've ever spent, to be honest. It's just flown by. Thanks for your time, Dean, and let's do this again early next month.
Sounds good, Richie. I'm so glad you're back. We need you, man.
Cheers, mate. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Dean. The amazing Dean Henderson, live on the line from Missouri. hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. And Dean's wife, Jill, has got her own blog, which is showmeoz, all one word, showmeoz.wordpress.com, showmeoz.wordpress.com. Amazing journalists, the likes of which we don't have enough of. And that's about, that's as high praise as I can possibly give them. Wonderful people. Right, 15 minutes past the hour. Time to take a very quick break. Back with more. And Allyn Condon, great British Olympian, joins me in a couple of minutes' time to time. What I already told you, didn't I? 15 minutes past the hour, yes. That's right.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever. Forever.
Introducing the H2O app, a powerful water structure and application that programs vibrational energies into water through the use of different sound frequencies. Once programmed, the use of water for drinking, cooking, bathing. Give it to your friends and colleagues or spread it around the garden. The list goes on. It's not just water that the app can be used for either. It's great for programming crystals too. The H2O app is free to download and is available on both Android and Apple platforms. For further information, go to h2oapp.online.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today. Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Welcome back to the program. Liz Jones, welcome to the show. Liz, nice to hear from you, Liz. I know Liz. Thanks for the kind words there for Dean. It is incredible stuff, this. And when you read through his books, and on the Rothschild, Warburg, Oppenheimer family dynasties, the genesis, if you want to use that word, of those families, they're intermarrying the royal families of Europe and of the world. Nobody has researched that in the world. Nobody. That specific subject. I'm not being unkind or unfair to any other researchers. I'm not. On this particular subject, he is the definitive expert. And his books are, I've read all his books because he's given me his books over the years. And they are life-changing when you read them and you begin to understand. And I sometimes wish when, you know, folks that are really mired in the alt-right or they're really mired in the progressive left and they get upset when, oh, I really thought you'd have been a supporter of Corbyn, Richie. Or I really thought you'd like Sanders. Or I really thought you'd follow Trump, Richie. I'm like, well, this is the reason why. I'm not arrogant about it. I'm not. Because I don't think I have all the answers. But I'm like, this is why I don't believe in them. Or any of them, ever. Nothing will ever change by assigning yourself a pigeonhole, by declaring yourself to be a conservative or a liberal or a socialist, and then supporting Mr. X, Mrs. Y, or Mr. Z, and saying, well, there you go. It'll be different next time, I'm telling you. It can never be different. And the people described by Dean Henderson couldn't give a rat's arse. Who gets in? Ever. Not to say that from time to time they don't nudge something here to happen over there, of course, but ultimately it doesn't matter. They control every side of the argument. And it's so difficult for the majority of people, A, to listen to that, B, to mull it over and to try it on for size. Does it fit that? Very extreme, that, saying that all of them are, because nobody's saying that they're all working for the Illuminati. It's not to say that individual men and women are at heart decent folks who want to do decent things. It would be stupid, foolish and immature to suggest otherwise. But the point is, within the eternal sea, thrashing around in the eternal sea, which is a metaphor for politics, the eternal sea, they can't do anything within that system. 20 minutes to the top of the hour. We've had no music on this show. It's been hectic, and I'm not going to take any now. I'm going to introduce my next guest. Hi to Derek, to Patrick, to Colin, Adam. Thanks for the videos. And to Gojira, who sent me a video earlier on. Don't be so precious and don't take everything to heart when somebody's ribbing you a bit or jesting with you a bit. My personal opinion of sophisticated weaponry that might have been used to bring down the Twin Towers is, of course, it's possible. It might even be probable, but I haven't seen it. I've seen no proof of its existence. And I'm not naive. I know that covert projects, military installations around the world, underground, maybe even under the sea, are working with things that maybe we couldn't imagine. But it's all maybes. You have to see the stuff. People who say directed energy weapons brought down the towers. It's an interesting theory. Do you have any proof of that? No, you don't. You've got a YouTube video. All right, okay. So I'll watch the YouTube video then, and it'll be some researcher saying that, look, it was a directed energy weapon. Look at all the explosions here. Look at the puffs of smoke. Look at the dust. Yeah, that's not proof. It's a very good theory, very interesting one, and one I'm happy to discuss. But where's the proof? Proof is important. Proof is important. Okay. It is when you're trying to reach people who usually think that people like us are crazy tinfoil hat wearers. You're not going to reach them by getting all obtuse when they just don't believe you. Believe me, here's a YouTube video. No, I won't, is what most people will say. I'll be sympathetic to your point of view because I think you might have a good point. But proof is vital, isn't it? In terms of actually reaching people. There you go. Look, there is a laser beam weapon. There is such a thing as a mini nuke. Nobody's ever seen one, mind. But that's the way I try and operate anyway. Right. Let's welcome, let's get our next guest on. I think it's important we get him on. While we do that, let me see there. Yeah, okay. Right, let's get our next guest on the programme. Tweets for him should be directed to me. It's at Richie Allen Show, but I will give you his Twitter handle in a minute. I mentioned at the top of the programme that he's a remarkable man. Not many people in the world, actually, have represented their country in the Summer and the Winter Olympics. I'm fascinated by that as a sports fan. Very well known he is, and a very highly regarded athlete. Now, when we spoke back in January, it was about a very emotional, a very distressing and a very disturbing time period in his life and in the life of his family. When his young boy Ben was born, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to welcome him to the programme. Allyn Condon, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm not too bad, Rich. How are you?
I'm very well. Do you know, I was just going to do that stupid thing where I was going to synopsise Ben's story and say, well, this is what happened to Ben. This is why he was taken to Bristol Hospital, and this is what had happened. And the thing to do would be to let you tell that story. It's been 8 or 9 months since you were on. We wanted to follow up on it anyway because it's vitally important. It's a massive story ongoing. It's happening to other people. So remind us who Ben was, Allyn, and what happened to him.
So Ben was our second child, Richie, and he was born in Southmead Hospital in Bristol. And we took him home, and he became unwell when we got home, and he ended up being taken into Bristol Children's Hospital, and he was in there for a week. And the care he gave him wasn't good enough. He contracted a hospital-acquired infection while he was there, and they failed to treat it. They told us they were going to treat it, but they failed to treat it. And then they also, on the day that he died, they give him a drug which was 2 days out of the hospital's own protocol, and it caused him to collapse and have a cardiac arrest, and he died a few hours later. And he, you're in this big mist, and you believe what you're told. And at the time, they told us that we didn't need a post-mortem. They knew what had happened. And about 6 weeks after Ben died, we went for a meeting, and the meeting was about finding out what had happened and us giving our feedback about what we'd seen going on in the hospital. And while we were in that meeting, they told us that Ben had actually developed an infection, and they told us that they'd only discovered it just after he died. So we were quite shocked that they told us about this infection, and all of a sudden alarm bells started ringing. And as the time went on, this is 2015, we had several meetings with them. The first of those meetings, they lied about blood tests they'd taken that they didn't take. They lied about test results saying they were negative when they'd never taken them. And then you may remember we had this further meeting with them where when we left the room, they tried to delete a recording where they'd admitted failings. So
they did actually. The recording is a terrible thing. It's dreadful to hear it because you've left the room, you and your wife, and they acknowledge the failings. And one of them even says something along the lines of, Mr. Condon and his wife, they're pretty savvy people. They're not stupid. And it's terrible to hear that because, if you're a human being, I can understand people's fear about losing their careers and all of that, but ultimately you're dealing with a couple who've lost their baby that nobody understands unless they've gone through it. And yet it was fairly callous, wasn't it, Allyn? The parents are a bit smart, so we have to be careful here.
Yeah, what they actually said when they spent sort of 2 hours with us telling us what hadn't happened, and we proved to them at that point about all the failings in care, and they sort of disputed it. And when we left the room, the first thing they said when we left the room is they are right. They are right. And the other doctor said, I don't know what to say. And then, they realised a little bit later into the conversation that the recordings were still on, and they asked for the recording to be deleted. They said that it would get them into difficulty, so they turned off their recording. They attempted to delete our recording and said that they didn't know how to do it, how deleting it all. So it was a clear breach. And funnily enough, Richie, that exact case, that exact doctor has just been heard in front of the General Medical Council, and the General Medical Council said that they don't believe that she's done anything wrong because they don't believe that part of the recording should have ever existed. That was their justification for her trying to cover up the details of a baby's death.
That's beyond shocking. So the GMC said that, protocol, they said basically that the protocol is that recording shouldn't exist. Therefore, let's forget what was said on it. And
yeah, they just basically said that they didn't see anything wrong with her asking for that to be deleted. That was the actual response that they gave.
And this was recent. I know this because I follow you on Twitter, right?
Yeah, this was a recent update on that recording. But that meeting, following on from that meeting, we actually got told the truth by a doctor. That this doctor come in and he told us they got it wrong. They'd made mistakes. They apologised. They should have given antibiotics. Everything we wanted to hear, we heard it. And then a year later, they went to an inquest and they all lied in front of the coroner and told the coroner there was never sign of infections. They even lied about the timeline of when Ben collapsed and stuff, and obviously we were very disappointed because the coroner sided with everything the consultants had said, only for a year after the inquest for them then to admit liability for causing Ben's death.
It's horrendous, isn't it? Now, the doctor who came to you and said, yeah, we made a mistake, we didn't recognise what was wrong with him, we should have done, did he then, that doctor or her, I don't know if it's a man or woman, did he or she go to the inquest and lie, having told you to your face that they accepted responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, this guy, a guy called Dr. Ian Jenkins, he actually in the meeting with us said to us, we missed the infection, we're sorry, we should have treated it, we should have given antibiotics earlier. And then in the inquest, he said there was never any sign of an infection and he shouldn't have given. And he also one of the other things was about this drug that was given out of protocol. So, he said that there's no way that they can say that this early he developed, had caused, so basically Ben developed a cardiac arrest and then developed an early and then collapsed. And he said to us, there's no way we can say that this early came before the cardiac arrest. And when we got to the inquest, he lied and told the coroner exactly the opposite to what he's told us. And I mean, you've heard yourself, I've published them recordings on.
Yeah, you have.
And again, they went to the General Medical Council for investigation, and the General Medical Council said that there was no wrongdoing.
This is a massive story. Allyn Condon is live on the line. Allyn is an Olympian, amazing athlete. Terrible thing. It must be. Couldn't imagine it, wouldn't pretend to know how it feels for any family, for a young boy, a baby, to die in those circumstances. And before Allyn came on in January, you probably thought I was a right a-hole in January because I was kind of reluctant to have you on and I had to see everything and hear everything. And everything you said, you were able to back up with the documentation that you sent me and the recordings and everything. It's dreadful. There was a real neglect in care that should have been offered to Ben. There's no doubt that people lied at the highest levels. There's no doubt that they've attempted to cover up, and it's horrendous, and the cover up is ongoing. What I don't understand is, and maybe you'll be able to help our listeners out, I don't imagine if a doctor, now I could be wrong and you're going to correct me probably, if a doctor says mea culpa, should have seen that and we didn't for whatever reason, we were badly understaffed that night, we were overworked and it's a tragedy. I will forever and a day try to make it up to the family, but we got it wrong. I don't imagine they will be jailed or struck off. I imagine there would be forgiveness. I don't know if you could or your family could forgive, but maybe the medical authorities could say, okay, you made a mistake. What I'm getting to is why that depth of cover up? Why have they gone to such lengths to avoid saying, Mr. and Mrs. Condon, we're sorry, we got it totally wrong? I think
it starts off. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to know, it's difficult to know whether, these cover-ups start at the bottom and go upwards, or whether they come the other way around. But these guys were lying from before Ben died. These knew on the day that Ben had an infection, and actually in a meeting after, they said to us, that infection brought them consultants to the bedside. Now the biggest issue we have at the moment is we've got the chief executive of that trust, digging his heels in and saying that them consultants didn't know about that result until 12 months after Ben died. So these consultants are saying, it brought them to the bedside, and the chief executive of the trust is saying they didn't know about it. Now, the problem is, it's all about, the cover-ups is all about the reputation, and the cover-ups is all about, if a child dies because of negligence, they lose all sorts of funding and everything, I'd imagine. But, it literally is about reputation. They care more about their reputation than the fact that they ripped the guts out of our family.
Why did they do it then? I believe you, because I have to point out again to my listeners who might be saying maybe Richie should play the devil's advocate a bit more, maybe he should be a bit hard with Allyn when Allyn makes these accusations. I can't be, because Allyn has supported everything he said. He substantiated it with proof, with documentation. If they knew that young Ben had this infection, why didn't they deal with it?
Well, on the day before Ben died, they told us that they were going to treat Ben with antibiotics, and that they were going to carry out this lung test, and they were going to carry out a blood test, and they were going to treat him at that point. And the reason that they were doing that lung and blood test was because they thought he had an infection. Now, eventually that result came back positive for the infection. So, they were right in thinking what they'd said. Now, they never give the antibiotics then. In fact, they never done the blood test, actually. They said they had done it, but they never done it. Now, the following day, he collapsed. He was blue. We were crying out for consultants to come to his bedside. And funnily enough, they decided to prescribe antibiotics at 11 o'clock. They eventually got round to prescribing them at 2:30 in the afternoon, and they forgot to give them. And they eventually gave them at 8 o'clock, 1 hour before he was going to die, 1 hour before he died, and 1 hour after they told us he was going to die.
How did they forget, Allyn? Do you have any idea? I know you might think this is a stupid question. You might think I'm frustrating you. I'm not. How can they forget? I'm not trying to excuse these people, but we hear so many stories about the deplorable situations, the doctors and nurses, the conditions they're working in, because I don't think that you think that, the people who forgot to give Ben the tablets, or of course it would have been intravenous, you don't think that they're evil. They're not evil. How did they forget something as important as that?
You know what? This is the big question, you see, because one of the things that one of the main things about Ben's entire illness is the complacency around it, the complacency around the care with him. 3 days before Ben died, we had a meeting, and we were discussing accommodation in the hospital, and the ward matron, he turned around and said to us, Ben is of no concern to us. We have children on this ward who can die. And that summed up their mentality towards Ben's illness. And that summed up their mentality and their care towards Ben. And the reason they forgot is because basically up until the time where he come and had the cardiac arrest, then people were complacent about it, and they left Ben because they were treating other patients and they prioritised other patients above him. Now, you're right. I don't think these people were evil. I didn't think for 1 second that they went to work that day to let Ben die. But when they realised what they'd done wrong, if they'd have held their hands up at that point and said, we made a big mistake here, we made a blunder, then people can say all would be forgiven. And they don't mean it, but I genuinely mean that. There was an ambulance, NHS 111, which should have sent an ambulance to Ben, and they got it wrong. They apologised. They suspended the person who should have sent the ambulance. They retrained her and they put her back in. And then people never heard from us again. We accepted their apology. And that just shows you that if somebody does apologise, we would have done that. But you just mentioned about them not being evil people. And you're right. The job is tough. They wasn't overstaffed. They wasn't stretched. They just ignored Ben's condition. And when they realised how much of a blunder they'd made, that's when they started to cover up, because all that mattered to them from that point was their job and their reputation.
Somebody came to the conclusion that he wasn't grievously or gravely ill, and that seemed to kind of filter down through everybody, and that's where the complacency began. We talked in January about the inquest was a disgrace. Obviously, people telling lies under oath is sickening, especially when, I mean, I'm no angel, and I don't want to sound like a virtue signaller now, because I'm not. I'm no angel, me, but I can't imagine that I could look across the room at you and your family and lie about it. I don't think I could live with myself, you know. But then again, I don't know. We talked then, of course, about you going to Bristol Children's Hospital and standing there day in, day out and telling people about what happened to Ben and the rights, you know, your rights, and how your family's rights had been trampled all over. Ben's rights had been trampled all over by the farce of the inquest. And of course, the police got involved and they said, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. And it must have been such an unbelievably hard time for you. And you did it. You turned up there, and eventually the national media, you know, eventually got involved and said, well, why is this ex-Olympic athlete, why is he standing here doing all of this? Does that feel such a long time ago now, Alan?
Well, the thing is, Richie, I still spend...
You still do it, don't you? That's the thing.
I still spend every single morning at that hospital.
Yeah, you still do
2 hours
it,
before I go to work.
Yeah.
But you know what? One thing I've realised is, you know, where this covered up started, you know, it's now changed, and now my main priority is to expose that CEO of that trust. I mean, this guy is the CEO of maybe 8,000 staff. You know, it's a big trust. It's one of the country's biggest university trusts, and this CEO, you know, and he sees me there every day. You know, he knows I'm there. You know, I'm there to expose him now. I'm there to expose him for covering up details of Ben's death.
And online, I mean, you've been very candid online. You've named the man. You've charged him with responsibility for what happened to Ben and the cover-up of it. Well, ultimately the cover-up of it. He wasn't responsible for what happened on the day, but you strongly believe that he's overseeing the cover-up, and you've named him, and you've gone out there, and he hasn't sent, you know, you've not received a letter from a solicitor, have you?
No. Ask yourself this question, Richie. If somebody accused you of covering up a baby's death, what would the first thing you'd do be?
Oh, yeah, of course. If you didn't do it, you'd be on to a solicitor.
You'd get your own legal team. Yeah. You would get your own legal team.
I'd be straight on to an expert in libel and slander. Of course I would. You know, somebody as well known as you going out publicly and saying that about me if I didn't do it.
Yeah. But no one's done anything. No one's done anything, and the reason they haven't is because, you know, I will happily have my day in court with these people. You know, I'm the one that holds all the evidence as to what they've done. They don't have a drop of evidence, but what they have behind them is they have regulators behind them who just accept what they do. They have a Department of Health who just accepts what they do. You know, the current Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, he doesn't bite. He doesn't listen to anything. He doesn't want to know about families who have suffered from cover-ups in the NHS. You know, he's not interested. And the
what
thing
scale,
is,
Alan? Sorry to interrupt you. What scale? Because we're coming to the crux of today. Obviously, it's important to talk about what happened to Ben and justice for him. And you can come on this programme whenever you want to update us, because it's very personal for you, obviously, and Jenny. It's obviously deeply personal. Your son, your flesh and blood. But of course, there's a wider context here. There's a bigger issue here, because since we've spoken, I've heard from people who've come on the programme to talk about NHS cover-ups, whether it be administrative cover-ups, where people are stealing working in the NHS. You know, I'm talking about Sharmila Chowdhury, who was on the programme. There are people who believe that there might be thousands of Bens. There might be thousands of children in recent years whom passed away in hospital, when maybe it could have been avoided, and maybe their families were never given a full and proper explanation as to what happened. How widespread do you think it is?
Well, I've actually been shocked. You know, I mean, really, I thought when this happened, I thought, you know, we had so much evidence about a cover up that, you know, that this was like a big thing. You know, this was a big news. And one thing I realised is the more I've gone on now, I've met more and more people, more and more families who have suffered exactly the same thing. You know, all different. Every case is different. You know, and we're not just talking about children here. We're talking about people's parents or, you know, siblings. It's widespread, and you know, it's made me sick. It's made me sick because I've seen how we've been dealt with, and actually, I understand now. When, you know, if I read half of what I'd written, I wouldn't believe it. You know, I really wouldn't, because it's so far-fetched. But one of the reasons that people do believe it is because I've produced evidence to show it, and I've listened and I've read evidence from these families as well. And I'm not talking about one or two, and I'm not talking about I'm literally talking about I've interacted with hundreds of families now who have all suffered cover-ups at the hands of the NHS in different hospitals across the country.
The Ombudsman is going to do a proper investigation, is that right?
Yeah, so the Ombudsman's now going to fully investigate Ben's case.
That's great news, that. Is it? How hearing that, which that's obviously happened since we last spoke, how important was it to hear that?
It is important, and I only hope that the Ombudsman does a good job, because I thought that the GMC would do a good job, and 7 investigations with the GMC, 7 doctors, all for serious claims, and no action taken against any of them 7 doctors. And some of them doctors have been before the GMC before. This wasn't the first time. So I hope the Ombudsman does do a good job. And I'm not after lynching anyone for no reason. I want justice for Ben, and I want justice for our family, because actually this has gone beyond Ben's death as well. The whole thing is this is about Ben and this is about our son, but actually this has gone beyond that now, because these people have put themselves into, they've covered up, and I hope that the Ombudsman exposes each and every one of them for it.
They'll never learn, Alan, will they? I mean, I began talking about the Hillsborough cover-up on the radio back in the early 2000s on a radio show in Waterford, when, we would speak to family members. Waterford City, where I come from, massive support there for English football clubs, Liverpool of course, and Man United, and maybe Celtic and so on. And we used to talk about it, and I know some of the families, and I've had them on this programme over the years. The establishment will never learn, will they, that people like you and Jenny and your friends and family and the other families who've lost people through negligence and incompetence, will the establishment ever learn that we just won't go away? Never going to stop,
How will they ever learn? They don't take responsibility. The problem is, there's obviously other issues that prevent them from accepting responsibility. I mean, who covers up a baby's death? Who covers up anyone's death? And at the end of the day, how can you learn from? The NHS's favourite saying is, lessons will be learned. You ask any family in our situation, the favourite saying is lessons will be learned. No, lessons won't be learned, because they won't even accept responsibility for what they've done. And there lies the problem. Until you accept responsibility, lessons won't be learned. It'll happen again. I say constantly now, I'm sitting waiting for another family to come out from Bristol, another tragedy to happen. The councils appear to want to cover it up and ignore it. The General Medical Council want to ignore it. The hospital wants to ignore it. The Department of Health wants to ignore it. Of course, how can we learn lessons when everybody wants to ignore it?
It's a logical conclusion to draw. If they've, and they have, it isn't if, they have endeavoured to cover up what happened to Ben. When you're covering up your mistakes, however tragic, the circumstances, however tragic they were, when you're covering them up, what you're not doing is making sure that it doesn't happen again. So you're entitled to draw the conclusion that it might be something that happens to another family in the near future.
Absolutely, and the thing is if you just say the guy, the guy who's the head of Bristol Trust, Robert Woolley, how can the CEO of the trust be allowed to continue in his role as a CEO when there's an accusation against him for covering up a child's death? When this, I've spoken with other families from Bristol alone who say, this man's been involved, this person's been involved, and it seems to repeat itself. History is repeating itself with these cases. No one's learning, no one's doing anything about it, and it's almost now like we just have to accept, that it's going on. And, I like I was saying before, I go to the hospital every morning and I stand outside handing out leaflets, and now I'm handing out leaflets with the CEO's face on, and people speak to me like I'm the problem. People who work for the NHS, we don't want to see you here anymore with your leaflets. We don't want to hear your lies, because they don't want to believe it, because this big NHS tag, it's like a Medal of Honor. And the NHS is a fantastic place. Don't get me wrong, but this can't go on. This has to stop. People can't be treated like that, and we can't just be expected to sit back and expect to take what's happening.
Well, they never saw you coming, Alan, and I mean that with absolute respect for you, because you know, you could have been forgiven for saying, you know, well, we'll just try and move on from it. And who would have blamed you and the family for doing that? But it's the right thing to do. A week on Wednesday, I think is the 19th of September, you're going down to the Department of Health in London and you're going to protest with other families. Tell us about that and what you hope to achieve. Well,
one of the things which I found was, you know, after speaking to the families, like I say before, it was sickening to find out what's going on. I spoke to a few families and we just thought, you know, we don't expect thousands and thousands of people to turn up, but we wanted to get a real positive message from families who'd suffered covered up in the NHS outside the Department of Health on Victoria Street. And we just wanted to make a point, you know, we want our families' faces to be seen, you know, and you know, if the Secretary of State wants to come out and address people out there, I'll be more than happy to speak to them. I'm sure other families will as well. But, you know, the saddest thing about it, Richie, is I've spoken to probably 50 families this week who've said, you know, we just can't make it. You know, either the families are destroyed for different reasons. They just can't make it. And I'm just hoping that we get some numbers down there so that actually, you know, we can maybe start this ball rolling. And I know other families have been fighting for years and years and years. So, you know, this is nothing new. But, you know, let's get this right outside their door, you know, and let them know that we're not putting up with it anymore.
What about Labour? You know, a kinder, more compassionate politics we've heard from the Labour Party. What about the Labour Shadow Health Secretary? What about Jeremy Corbyn? What about John McDonnell, Emily Thornberry? Have any of these people shown any interest? They must know about Ben because it made national news in this country. You know, you're a very well-known athlete. Have any of these people said to you, well, you know, we will ask questions on your behalf, Alan, or, you know, in the event we get in, we'll do something about it?
Do you know what? No one said a thing. No one's took any interest whatsoever. You know, and that goes from, you know, Bristol MPs, nothing at all. You know, Bristol Council don't want to know about it. All these, you know, like you just mentioned there, the shadow set. You know, I've tweeted, I've emailed. No one at all. No one wants to know about it. It's almost like the best thing to do with these cover-ups is brush them under a big carpet and leave them there. No one wants to pop their head up and say, hang on a minute, you know, I'll stand up here, I'll be counted, I'll ask these questions, you know, and you know, you mentioned before about Hillsborough, you know, look at that. That was buried until someone stood up and actually, you know, stood up in Parliament and actually done something about it and said something about it, you know, and that's what triggered everything that happened afterwards. But no one with these cases is willing to stand up and say anything. It's almost like everybody is just happy for it to happen. And you know what? When it happens to one of their kids, I'm sure that
well, you see, that's the thing. I have a final question for you. It's not meant to be callous in any way. If you felt that you would get absolute transparency, if these people were given immunity from any further action or any prosecution, if they had immunity, would you, I don't know whether you would or not, but I'm asking you, would you now say yes, they could have immunity if they came clean about everything?
Do you know what? You mentioned before about me on Twitter. One every now and then, you know, once a month, once every 6 weeks, I've put a tweet out there saying, you know, if these doctors come forward now and tell us exactly what happened to Ben and tell us exactly why they lied, or what happened, and why did we get from the point of negligence to 3 years down the line now where we're battling a big cover up. You know, if they come forward and said to me, this is what happened, absolutely. I'm not. This is the thing. I'm not
it's
interested.
Not revenge,
and
no.
my family are not interested in you know, in hanging these people. We just want answers and we want the truth and we want to know exactly what happened to Ben, because everything we've found out, we've unearthed ourselves. Nothing we've found out was given to us. We found out because we caught them out, we tripped them up, and these are not honest people, and we've given these people the chance to be honest, and we've said we'll drop it, and they've chose not to do that. So what are we meant to do?
You've met them more than halfway, haven't you, Alan?
Absolutely.
I want to say, folks, Alan is on Twitter, and his Twitter handle is @Allyn Condon. Now, Alan is spelled ALLYN @Allyn. That's a Welsh way of spelling it, isn't it, Alan?
I think I don't know. I don't know.
I could be wrong. The Welsh spell it sometimes ALUN, so I could be wrong myself. It's ALLYN Condon, Condon. That's all one word, at Allyn Condon. Follow Alan on Twitter, and beingben.org.uk. beingben.org.uk is a website you should check out. Obviously, I keep saying we, it's just me. I'm obviously hugely interested in what's happened, in what will happen, and you're always welcome to come back on here and update us. And I hope that there's a good turnout a week on Wednesday, the 19th of September, and I hope that somebody has the decency and the humanity from the Department of Health to come out and at least acknowledge it and say, all right, Mr. Condon, I am Mr. or Mrs. whomever, and I listen to you. I hope that happens, Alan.
Thank you very much for your time again, Richie.
Anytime, mate. You know, you can come on the show anytime when there's news. I really appreciate it. And there's been a lot of tweets. You'll find the tweets online anyway under Richie Allen Show. A lot of people interested in this. All that's left for me to say is I think you're courageous, you and Jenny and your family. I think you're remarkable. I think your demeanour is amazing considering what happens to you. There's no anger. There's no, well, of course there's anger, but there's no sense of wanting to, bury people or get revenge. You just want the truth. I think you're remarkable, Alan. Thanks very much, mate. Amazing.
Cheers, Richie. Speak to you soon.
Look after yourself. Bye for now, Alan. That's Allyn Condon. Alan, former athlete, Olympian, of course, summer and winter. A very rare thing that. Speaking there about the death of his son Ben, who died. He died wrongfully in Bristol Children's Hospital in 2015. There was a serious neglect in terms of the care that should have been provided to him and wasn't. And what's worse, of course, is the cover-up that has taken place since then. And all of this has been proven by Alan with documentation and with audio. We went through it in January. That interview is on Podomatic. It's on our Podomatic channel. It was deleted with everything else that was deleted by YouTube back in February of this year. But it's a very important story, that it really is. And there are people who heard Allyn Condon speak with me in January, and they then contacted the programme. I won't say a lot of people, but I say maybe one or two people, maybe three people, who asked to remain anonymous, and they believe that a relative of theirs, a child or a relative, was killed because of a neglect in care at a hospital they attended, and that subsequently that hospital wasn't forthcoming with information. And I was told by, as I said, two or three different people last January, they felt that it was because of a cover-up. And when I do an interview like that, when people like Alan come on this programme, sometimes I am inundated through Twitter and through messages on social media, people saying that they believe it's only the tip of the iceberg. So there you go. Derek says, Alan is right, sweep it under the carpet and hope that it doesn't come out in the public. They don't care. If they did, this wouldn't happen. Health care, I don't think so. More like health don't care. It is a terrible state of affairs we are in. It's an incredibly callous and sickening thing not to come clean about it and to say, yes, we didn't prioritise the baby. Yes, we felt that he was okay. Yes, when we identified the infection, we didn't give the antibiotics when we should have done. Yes, we forgot. Yes, we screwed up royally. We shouldn't have done that. It happened. And whoever it happened, we will find why it happened, and we will endeavour to ensure that it never happens again. And we will live with it for the rest of our lives. And we will apologise till the day we die to the family, and we will try and ensure it doesn't happen again. But they don't do that. They cover it up. Which I can't imagine how bad it is for any family to lose a baby. How could you possibly know unless it happened to you? But then to compound that by telling them lies. Lies on top of lies. A house of lies. Telling them privately, yes, we screwed up, and then going to the inquest and lying through your teeth. How callous do you have to be like that? But this is the world we live in. This is the paradigm. It's the reality. That's about it for the programme today. I'll be back with you tomorrow at 5 p.m. UK time. Don't forget, I'm putting the programme on to the internet. I'm putting it on podcast around about 15 minutes after it ends. So if you are a diehard 7 p.m. listener and you got home in time from work to listen to it, don't despair. You can pick it up from 7:15. It's on iTunes. It's on Podomatic.com. It's on Spotify. Right? You can listen to it there. But I'll be back with you at 5 tomorrow, and I've got 2 more terrific guests lined up. In fact, I've got some terrific guests lined up all week long. Follow the programme on YouTube as well. It's going up on YouTube on the same day now because of the earlier start. It's youtube.com/Richie Allen Show, all one word, youtube.com/Richie Allen Show. That's my YouTube channel, and the entire programme minus the music. There was no music today really. I'm going to close out with a tune now, but it's the entire show minus the music on youtube.com/Richie Allen Show, and it's usually on YouTube by about 10 p.m. every evening, the day's show. How about that? Right, going to finish with some Stevie Wonder. There's a song called Higher Ground, closes out Monday's Richie Allen Show. That was the show for the 10th of September 2018. Thanks for listening to it. Thanks for participating on Twitter. Glad that you do. Love it. See you tomorrow. Look after yourselves and one another. Bye now.